Thank you, Madam Chair, for continuing to focus on the need to reduce emissions from the use of fossil fuels. I have a lead up to a question for you, Mr. Fowke. Hawaii is on the leading edge of incorporating renewable power and energy storage. And of course, Hawaii is not connected to any other state's grids, so we're kind of on our own. I visited the Hawaii solar and storage facility on Kauai Island in Hawaii in April. It is the largest combined solar and battery storage facility in the world. It generates 11% of Kauai's power and can serve as much as 40% of Kauai's evening peak power demand. Altogether, Kauai Island Utility Cooperative gets 50% of its power from renewable sources, and it expects to reach 60% renewable power by the end of this year, with another combined solar and battery storage system at Pacific Missile Range Facility, Barking Sands Naval Base. Hawaiian Electric, which is the largest utility in the state, and before Kauai Utility Co-op came along, it was the only utility in the state, recently received approval for 6 new solar and storage projects to provide 247 megawatts of solar energy with almost 800 megawatt hours of storage, enough to power 105,000 homes per year, while eliminating the use of more than 48 million gallons of imported fossil fuel. And Hawaii was the most fossil-dependent, imported fossil fuel-dependent state in the country, and we had probably the highest electricity rates in the country, possibly with the exception of Alaska. So the company is preparing a second round of bids for even more solar and storage to replace fossil fuel plants, and there will be even more innovation in the future to meet Hawaii's goal of 100% renewable power by 2045. From a utilities perspective, what are the challenges of operating a system with technology solutions that do not have a long history of commercial use? And do you think it is important for the federal government to reduce the risk of adopting early stage technology? So I recognize that the research is really important, but then we really need to figure out how to deploy these technologies in a way that is meaningful. So what are your thoughts about the federal government's role in the deployment side of things?
Well, Senator, thanks for the question. You're absolutely right. Regulated utilities really aren't designed to do a lot of research, and because their obligation is to pick the most economically efficient resources and put them on the grid. And if there's other economic signals, the price of carbon, et cetera, we factor that into that. But experimenting in a large scale outside of pilot programs is difficult. So that's where the federal government, I think, comes in to do the research, provide the incentives to make that more affordable so they can be implemented. You know, your concept, you talked about the Hawaiian Islands being an island. I think that's very important, because what we need to focus on is take that concept as we look for adding as much renewables onto the big grid, the island, if you will, as we possibly can. And depending upon what your substitute is, in the case of imported fossil fuels, it's a pretty high cost, as you know. So we've had a program called Steel for Fuel, where literally the steel is the renewables, and what we're displacing is the fuel. And it turns out that the cost of the fuel that you save covers, and then some, the cost of the steel. That's exactly what I think Hawaii's doing. And I think you'll find that you can have, on that island, or the big grid, if we were here in the continental U.S., you'll probably be able to get to that 60%, maybe even more. But there does come a saturation point on the big grid, back to your question about reliability, where we're going to need storage and we're going to need dispatchable resources, I believe. And perhaps they come from biofuels, perhaps they come from hydrogen, geothermal. There's a number of different things, and I think we need to be technology agnostic about it. So my point is, we'll put as much renewables as we can reliably and affordably do on the grid or the island. Then you need to look for these other technologies and the research that'll that'll help us make those technologies viable is the role I think the federal government plays.
Well, and not just in the support for research, though, but we need support in, there are these new technologies being developed for storage, et cetera, but we're going to need some help in how to implement or to put in place these innovations, and that's where maybe the federal government has a larger role to play, in addition to supporting the research aspects.
I would agree with that. I also would agree that's where your utility can play a big role, too. We do a very good job of starting small and then scaling at the
Yes.
speed of value.
Thank you. I do have further questions for the record that I will submit. Thank you very much.